Chairman, and good morning, fellow Republicans. I'd like to ask you all to please take just a moment to think about what you're looking for in the next United States Senator from Georgia. Everybody got an idea? All right, now listen to this partial list. American Conservative Union's Conservative Honor Roll. Citizens Against Government Waste Taxpayers Hero. Georgia Farm Bureau's Friend of the Farmer. Faith and Freedom Coalition's Friend of Freedom. National Taxpayer Union's Taxpayer's Friend. Military Officer Association, Perfect Score. NRA's A+ rating. House Republican Conference, Ronald Reagan Award. Christian Coalition's Friend of the Family. National Federation of Independent Businesses Guardian of Small Business. Vietnam Veterans Perfect Score. Family Research Council's True Blue Politician. Club for Growth, Defender of Economic Freedom, and that, ladies and gentlemen, is just a very small percentage of the awards and recognitions that our featured speaker, Congressman Jack Kingston, has reaped, emblematic of his conservative leadership and legislative expertise. He also deserves the award Champion Vote Getter in a Tough District. His first district includes the cities of Savannah and Brunswick. Definitely no piece of cake for a Republican, but Jack has been elected to 10, count them 10, consecutive terms, and with an average, get this, an average of 75.1% of the vote. 75.1%. That's not a record of landslides. That is a record of awesome tectonic avalanches. He's also a champ at raising campaign funds, which is going to be very important here in Georgia, against the Obama cronyism money machine. And as evidence of that, Jack is currently leading all candidates in both parties with $2.9 million on hand, $800,000 of which was raised in just the last quarter. If Republicans are to hold this key Senate seat, key if we are to have a chance to put an end to Harry Reid's liberal bossism Senate reign, we need a committed conservative who is a proven vote gatherer and a conservative champion. Ladies and gentlemen, that man is with us here this morning, and it is my honor, my privilege, to present to you and to ask you to give a warm welcome to Congressman Jack Kingston.
Maury, thank you very much. Thank you very much, Maury. I was just sitting there, I don't know about y'all, but I enjoyed it. I was thinking we might just yield more time to you. It's great to be with you, and I certainly appreciate the opportunity to be here. I want to check, Rick, what is my time?
30 minutes, 40 minutes.
Oh, really?
Well, we've got
30 minutes, man. Most of these forums, you drive 900 miles and you get 3 minutes. And then they cut it in half. Well, I tell you what, I won't speak that long, but I will be glad to answer any questions, whatever. And I just want to say, right off the bat, a great delegation. Mandy, Scott, and Calvin Hill, and the state of Georgia really lost a true friend and a great conservative in Calvin Hill this week. So I just want to express my sympathy from the Low Country, the Cherokee County. Talk about issues, obviously, but I wanted to also, to give you a little bit of biographical sketch so that you know who I am and know in the spirit of the great country music song, Back Where I Come From, so you kind of know back where I come from. And I was reared in Athens, Georgia, back in a time when you said yes, sir, and no, ma'am. You didn't sass the teacher at school. If you did, you feared your dad would find out about it, and then you knew what would happen. Every child had a chore. If you came home from school at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, the last place your mama would find you was inside the house, but you would be there for the 6 o'clock supper. If your car needed an oil change, you didn't think about ever paying for it. Obviously, the teenager down the street would teach you how to do it so that you, in turn, could turn around and teach that to the kid under you. And that was a good time, and I felt like very blessed to grow up in that period of just good old basic American values. Hard work. My dad was raised in the Depression in Brooklyn, New York. He grew up hard. He wanted to make sure his kids that we were frugal and that we were hard working. When I was 5 years old, I was on my first allowance. A nickel a week. Big money. Could go to the Five and Dime and buy toys on occasion with my own money. Now I had to start working too. I was a garbage man. I was pretty good at it. Still have not gotten a promotion though. My wife still expects that out of me. You know, I've added on to the job description here and there, but I learned a lot. You know, I cut the grass, I cleaned the gutters, I swept the driveway. Things that you and I all did back when we were young. In fact, let me ask you, how many of you started working when you were 8, 9, 10 years old in your household? Raise your hand. Now, how many of you learned something when you were 8, 9, 10 years old that you still apply each and every single day to your life? And don't we wonder, what is it in our society that we think we should exempt some kids from learning that great, that wonderful, that liberating work ethic that has made America so strong? That's why, among other things, I introduced an amendment to the food stamp bill. And it didn't sound real revolutionary. To me, it just said, if you're able-bodied, you ought to be required to have a job before you get your food stamps. You know, we also did a bill last year that said if you're on unemployment insurance, you ought to be drug-free. Because if we're going to pay you to stand on the sideline, you need to do your part and be ready to go to work if that job comes up. Now, my dad put me on a clothing allowance when I was 12 years old, $3.25 a week, and I can promise you, it wasn't any money back then either. What he was saying is, it's now time for you to work outside of the house. I started selling programs at the University of Georgia. All kids did. 25-cent basketball programs. You got a nickel on each one, and the big money, of course, was in the football game. $1, you got a 10 cents commission, lower percentage, but I learned that if I started selling those things on Friday nights and going door to door to do it in Athens, Georgia, I could make my $10 by the time the kickoff game, and that's what I did. And that's what was so great about that time period. Every kid did it. And you know what else I found out when I was 12 years old? Once I started paying for my clothes, I didn't leave my coat nowhere. When I left, that coat was with me. And you know, if you're a member of a YMCA right now, if you want to go through some fine-looking clothes, just look in the Lost and Found department. The stack is this high. But you know, you learn to take care of things in that time period. Now, my mother, who was 88 years old and sitting right here, top 1% of all moms in the United States of America, as I see many of you probably are as well. My mother taught us idealism. Got us to church every Sunday, taught us about Jesus, but also taught us this idealism. You see, back in the 1960s in Clark County, Georgia, there weren't very many Republicans. It was kind of like you could list them. You knew who they are. You knew what the families were. We actually would put yard signs up for Republican candidates, and back then we really didn't have yard signs, they were posters, and our own neighbors would come by and tear them down. And they thought it was great sport. Well, the Kingstons are supporting a Republican again, let's make fun of them. But you know what I learned is that ideas were more important than parties, and you can stand a little humiliation if that's what it takes. When I ran for the state legislature in 1984, I was told over and over again, Jack, you'll never get elected as a Republican. And look, the Southern Democrats, you can support everything that we support. Just be a Democrat. Forget that the first vote will be for Tom Murphy, who is the Democrat Speaker of the House. You'll be one of us. But I've decided to run as a Republican. We had 23 Republicans in the House. And I know Mandy is here, and Scott. I mean, you know, it's a little bit different program these days. But we had 3 in our pledge class. We leaped from 23 to 26. But I learned that if you read the bills, novel concept in Washington, D.C., and and you return phone calls, you could get a lot done. Because I remember, you know, I was elected by certain people, and there were a whole bunch of new friends that didn't help me back when I was going door to door on those hot July days, but suddenly they were my friends. But I never forgot, the lesson was that I represented the people who were with me in that hot summer when I was going door to door. In Washington, D.C., I've never joined the club. I've never gotten Potomac fever. I've come home every weekend. I raised my children in Savannah, Georgia. I drove the carpool because I think it's very important for elected officials to never forget who sent you and what you were sent to do. Those are just some things on my background that I thought, you know, might be good for you and I to know, because there are a lot of fine people running in this seat, and I'm glad to be on the ticket with all of them. And I want you to know that whoever the nominee is, I hope everybody in this room is going to be on the same team. Because what we're seeing right now is an outside group who wants to divide our party, and they're licking their chops. Oh, the Tea Party doesn't do this. Oh, Harry Reid and Ted Cruz will never get together. Well, ladies and gentlemen, we can, we will, we must get together, because we have to focus on Barack Obama, Nancy Pelosi, and Harry Reid. And you know, we can make this happen. Two issues you and I, as conservatives, have to own, unequivocally. We have to own national defense and jobs. Now, I've represented 5 out of our 8 military installations. I've spent a lot of time on military policy. I've visited our soldiers overseas. I signed up for the draft. I did not serve. That was not called. Went straight through college. And I'm very, very thankful for those who did. And one of the commitments I've made as a member of the Defense Committee is I never, ever want our soldiers, sailors, or airmen to fight a fair fight. I want them to be able to go up against any army, anytime, any place, and beat the heck out of them. Because if our men and women in uniform have the strongest tanks, the fastest airplane, and they're firing the most accurate missiles, then you and I are going to be safe here in homeland America, and your family and your kids will be safe, but also we want them to be safe. I have been to too many tree planting ceremonies at Fort Stewart where you plant a tree in memory of a 27-year-old who's not coming back from Afghanistan and Iraq, and you look in the face of the mom and the dad and the brother and the sister and the 2 kids, and you think that is the family of freedom. That is the face that we'll not see again. And I think that you and I should always be mindful of that. So when we're spending money on developing new tanks and weapon systems, it is a good investment. And the other thing on that line, let's spend the money against the bad guys not spying on American citizens. And I appreciate the good work of the NSA, but I don't need them collecting my phone calls and your phone calls. And let me say this, another thing, speaking of this administration, if you put your hand on an American citizen abroad, especially an ambassador, we're coming after him. And then we're going to come after you. And if the United Nations has a problem with it, they can write us a letter when we get home. And that has to be the signal we send around the world. National security is what you and I as conservatives have to own. The second thing is job and job creation. I come from the private sector. Back when I had an honest job, I was a property and casualty insurance agent. I called on small businesses. I learned that businesses do best without micromanagement from bureaucrats in Washington, D.C. Case in point, there's this little thing called Obamacare. Remember, that was the bill that was going to let you keep your own health care. That was the bill that was under $1 billion, or let me see, it was under $1 trillion, but now it's $1.7 trillion. And that was the bill that employers were supposed to get behind. How many of you have talked to anybody whose premium has decreased? Raise your hand. I've asked that question every single place I go. I ask the question on the floor of the House. I've given out my toll-free number. I've said, if you know anybody whose premium has decreased, let us know, because the thing that the President said is we're going to drive down the cost of your health care. The second thing he said is we're going to increase access. I talked to a business in Atlanta, Georgia, 1,000 employees. They put 900 of them on a part-time basis. We know of 2 Fortune 500 companies in Atlanta, Georgia. One said they will no longer cover 15,000 spouses of their employees. And another one said they'd no longer cover 20,000 part-time employees. Access has not increased because of Obamacare. We do have to repeal it, and I think it would be good to replace part of it. But I think the best thing in the world would be to get the government out of health care and let the market take over. And you know, how many of you have used is it Expedia when you go traveling, you want to find out where the cheap hotel is? There's a company right now in Alpharetta who's working on that for health care. Saw a gentleman back here earlier today with an air cast on. I had to wear an air cast. So I politely did not ask him why he was wearing one, because I know he has to answer that question 15 times a day. But the reality is, when I got my air cast, I had no idea how much it was. Can anybody tell me how much an air cast is? I don't know. But $500?
$300 to $500.
Well, you know what? I'd like to know if it's 3 or if it's 5, and if I can beat that price. And what this company is doing online is giving consumers an opportunity on those oddball purchases that you might have to make, but you don't know that much about, so that you can shop it around. And that is happening in Alpharetta, and it did not take some smart person from the Obama administration to come up with a new program. It was simply good old American private sector capitalism. And if you think about the overreach of the government, not just with Obamacare, but with Dodd-Frank, with the EPA, it's also the uncertainty. Regulations here, businesses don't like it, but they can adjust. Regulations here, they don't like it, they can adjust. But when the regulation moves up and down, they don't know what to do. So money stays on the sideline. I was an economics major. One of the things that I learned, and I always say this to high school kids, and I know that you know it, but price, in the long run, is a function of cost. Period. When we put on new costs for government, whether it's a tax, whether it's a regulation, when government puts those on businesses, you and I pay the price. Businesses don't pay taxes, they collect taxes. And they don't understand that in Washington, D.C. But we have to remember, Lowe's department store came to me and said there's a new ceiling fan regulation. 206-page regulation for ceiling fans. There's also a new proposal, and I think it's the EPA, on dishwashers that will require 1 out of 6 dishwashers in America to be replaced. But perhaps the most absurd one I've seen lately is that hotels will now have to allow a service horse to come in the room, because apparently some folks have complained that service dogs, like the C&I dogs, are offensive. So now you can bring a little pony in the room with you. I don't know about you, but I travel a lot. I'd rather follow the room where the smoker was than the guy that had the horse. I'm not sure what that horse will do to the carpet. Maybe that horse hopped into bed. I don't know. But to think about our government sitting up there in Washington, D.C., coming up with these new rules and regulations, and we wonder why we have such a high unemployment rate. And if you look at the real unemployment rate, it's much higher than 7-8% that the government keeps telling us. You think about all the discouraged workers who've been sitting on the sideline. You know, it's very, very frustrating to me. Glenville, Georgia, there's a Dairy Queen down there. And in that Dairy Queen is a lady who has worked there since 1968. Since 1968, she has served with great dignity hamburgers, french fries, milkshakes. And she's very proud to have that job. She's probably maxed out at maybe $10, $12 an hour. What we have to be sure is that that lady still has that opportunity to keep that job, and that employer isn't forced to go in there and say, I don't want her anymore. I can't afford dear sweet Sue or Joan, whatever the name is. You think about that. And I think about that lady a lot. There's another lady I think about. I was in Walmart one night. The lady behind the counter looked at me and she said, "Oh, I know who you are. You're the weatherman." And you know, being in Congress, I may have just said, "Yeah, it's going to rain," and gone out of there. But I said, "Well, no, ma'am, I'm Jack Kingston." And she said, "Oh yeah, you're the congressman. Yeah, you know, I've been meaning to call you. I want to talk to you about something." And I said, "Oh, yeah, what's that?" She said, "Well, you know, this isn't my real job. I'm here at night because my husband can't work anymore. See, I have a real job. I work 9 to 5, but my husband became disabled and I couldn't work anymore. So I'm working this job 3 hours a night." Now, my brain was, you know, in motion thinking, okay, what program does she want? What is it that we can do for her husband? And, you know, and she said, "And here's what I want to talk to you about." I went down to the Department of Children and Family Services to ask about what I can do. And they told me that I could quit working and I'd get free health care under Medicaid. And that's what I needed to do. And what I want to tell you, Mr. Kingston, that's totally wrong, and that is what's wrong with government in America today. And I started thinking about that, and you know, she is so right. And sometimes in our society, we focus so much on the extremely poor and extremely rich, and we forget about that struggling middle class who's just trying to get through, and when milk goes up and when gasoline gets up, they're on the front line of it. And I think as a party, that's why you and I have to own the jobs issues, so that there are plenty of opportunities for everybody at every level. So thank you for letting me be with you today, and I don't know if we have time for questions. I think I have gone sufficiently enough, and I know you have other candidates. I do want to say this. Yes, ma'am?
I have a question.
Okay. I don't know what my time frame is, but we'll do what we can. You can just say it loud.
Okay, we're spending billions on Obamacare. We know that the households, they're only supposed to have one phone. They've got multiple phones. What do you propose being done?
I'm glad you asked that question. You know, that is such a great question. In New York City, what do they have a high tolerance for? Extreme poverty and extreme wealth. The thing they can't stand is the middle class. And it is crony capitalism. It is, to me, the picture of liberalism. And you can see the same thing with the Obama phone. The idea behind it back in the day of landlines was, well, how do you expect somebody to get a job if they're applying for a job and the employer calls them and says, "Hey, we got a job for you," but they can't answer the phone. So there was an idea behind, you know, giving a landline to somebody who's looking for a job. Well, that has morphed, as you know, into cell phones. And what has happened, who's happy with that arrangement? Obviously the recipient. Who else? Absolutely. The businesses who get the government to buy their phone. I had a man from Georgia came to see me, and he said, "You know, this is a real good program. It's getting people jobs. It's doing all this, do that." It's from Atlanta. And I said, "Of course it's a good deal for you. The government's buying phones from you, brother. There's nothing remarkable about that. That doesn't make it a good program." And let me ask you this. In this administration, do you not think that they use those phones to text message and get out the vote? I mean, I don't know what they're doing. But it is not justifiable. I'm a co-sponsor of a bill to repeal the Obama phones. Now, I'm sorry to tell you the rest of the story. The companies who sell them have PACs, they have lobbyists, and they've made sure that that bill gets stuck in committee. And I'm very disturbed about that. And I think one of the things we have to do as Republicans is remember that capitalism, free markets are what we're about, and not getting bought off on things like that. And it really worries me.
Tim Downing, Mayor of Holly Springs. What is your position on the state of taxation in America? Do you support the replacement of the IRS, and if so, how would you propose to do that?
John Linder introduced the fair tax as a member of Congress. I was an original co-sponsor then. Rob Woodall, who took his place, reintroduced it. I'm an original co-sponsor on it now. I think we have to have tax simplification in order to compete in the international marketplace.
Yeah.
And that's on my brochure, but I don't think my brochure has quite got around all the tables. So.
Now, if Obamacare is allowed to stand, we no longer have government by consent of the governed. What should we do about that?
I think that the repeal of Obamacare, as much as anything, isn't just an action item, but a statement of principle. And they're indivisible. I think as Republicans, we have to keep telling people, you know what? And it's interesting, the number of people who said, y'all shouldn't have let the government shut down over Obamacare. And I replied, it's 1/6 of the economy. It's well worth fighting over 1/6 of the economy. And so I think we have to continue to push back. We have to chip away at it. The Democrats are great long-term, incremental thinkers. They can just add this little program and this little group and this little group to whatever, and before you know it, these are huge programs. We may have to dismantle Obamacare in that manner, but it's got to be done. And I think to move to a system, say, you know, these exchanges, you ought to be able to buy insurance across state lines because you got this exchange now. Now, how would they, you know, that's been a Republican position, buy insurance across state lines. Well, why not let that be done in an exchange? I'm not trying to make an exchange better, but I'm trying to undermine what their argument is. Having tort reform so that you get rid of the frivolous lawsuits is something very basic. Talk to any doctor, any hospital on how much defensive medicine they have to practice and how that ramps up the cost of their health care. And then the other thing is, getting back to the aircast, you got to have skin in the game as consumers. Because if a third party was paying for your groceries and you paid one flat fee, why would you not buy steak and lobster every week? And that's what our healthcare system is right now. So I believe that it is good to have health savings accounts, something that put consumer skin in the game. And I think that we just have to keep hammering and hammering and hammering away. And remember, Obamacare isn't the first time the government has gotten into medicine. I mean, you have Medicare, you have Peach Care, you have Medicaid. I mean, there's a big relationship, and I think it's costing us in the quality of health care.
Mr. Kingston, I have a question for you. A week ago Friday, President Obama put out another executive order. Most people don't know about this because he does them on Friday nights so nobody knows. And it's preparing the United States for the impacts of climate change. And in this, he has another council. If you read the whole piece of legislation, what he has is a decree. It allows them to build new buildings, start new staff, start new things. And on the councils, one of the groups are you familiar with the Millennium Challenge Corporation?
Well, the one for international aid?
Yes,
Yes.
That's one of the councils that's
Yeah.
on here, and this mandate is going to decimate the United States. Are you going to stand up and have this removed?
Absolutely. As I understand it, he put something like 14 mayors on there, and only 3 of them are Republicans.
Well, he's got, the mayors that's part of it, but the governors, there's 12 governors. One of them is a Republican, but he's the governor of Guam. Okay, the rest of them are Democrats.
Let me say this, we'll do everything we can to defund that, and that is one of the biggest problems right now, is that the bureaucracy has gotten too powerful. One of the things we try to do in Congress, and as a member of the Appropriations Committee, is starve the beast, because people think cutting spending is simply about a dollar reduction, and when we are borrowing 42 cents on every dollar we spend, we absolutely have to reduce spending. But what you're also doing is tying the hands of the bureaucracy for more intrusion on the marketplace. And that's a great example, because these folks are not elected by us at large, and they don't need to have influence.
Right, and the other part of this whole thing is that this whole thing is their climate preparedness for what? It's talking about storms, how we're going to change the climate, what we're going to do, be ready for this, for climate change, which the scientists have said don't exist. So that's the thing is, are you going to champion something to get this going?
Yes, sir. We're going to do everything we can to defund that. We have to keep them in check.
Talk to us about immigration, please, and what's your issues on that?
Well, I think that there's 3 areas in which there is some agreement on immigration. Number 1, border security. 51% of the illegals come through Arizona. And the reason is we've left holes in the fence for animal migration. And the antelopes let the word get out, so now the people are coming through there. So part of it is you really have, and it might not be a fence, but you got public lands issues where the Border Patrol can't arrest people. I mean, there's some absurdity. You have to be serious about the border. Second part is 40% of the illegals came here legally and let their papers expire. You have to move from a paper I-9 to an electronic verification. Because one of the things that if you clean up the food, you won't have the pests coming to get the food. I'm not referring to these people as pests at all, but I'm just saying that if you drive the drive magnet, that's a huge step in the right direction. And then finally, let me say this, getting a little bit to the harder stuff here. We've always had guest worker programs, and I'm going to tell you why. Represent Homerville, Georgia. In Homerville, Georgia, if you're growing blueberries, you may need 400 workers to pick blueberries for 6 weeks, and then you don't need them. Now on paper it says, you might think, well, then they just go to onions, then they go to apples. Well, you know, the fruit doesn't quite harvest like that, come to harvest. But Americans, because of a very, very generous public assistance benefit, will not do all this work anymore. Now I think part of it has to be welfare reform. And that gets back to the workfare that I was talking to in terms of eligibility to food stamps. You do have to have welfare reform. But the other part, I believe, is allowing people to come here and do a specific job for a specific employer for a specific time period where you know who they are and where they're coming from. Then I think that that's something that we can work out. Finally, you can't have amnesty. You can't say just because you've broken the law. You know, just because you broke the law a long time ago doesn't let you off the hook. And so I think it's those three things, and after that, the Senate bill's not going to move. I do want to say this, though. As the nephew of a Hungarian immigrant who left to get away from Hitler, what we want America to be is the mecca for the best and brightest. If you have something you really want to invent, or a book to write, or a song to sing, or whatever, we want to make sure that the cream of the cream comes to America. We have about 1 million legal immigrants a year come into our country, and what I'm saying is, let's be selective about it so that we can bring in the Einsteins of the world. And I think that that is part of the American dream. And
We
yes,
have
sir.
time for 2 more questions. Don Conkey and then Conrad has hand up next.
Mr. Kemp, you used the term a moment ago, we Republicans. We've got members in the Senate up in Washington, D.C. that I don't consider to be Republicans. You got the senator from Arizona, you got another senator from South Carolina. There's a sickness, in my opinion, at least, that there's a sickness that is running rampant in the country that is taking and creating all the chaos that we're talking about right here. You're talking about individual issues. How are we going to change that atmosphere? How is the Republican Party going to be able to stand up on its feet and talk about the principles that they themselves say they believe in